Hi, I'm Catherine Llewellyn, the host of the podcast. You can find out all about Truth and Transcendence on truthandtranscendence.com. And you can find out all about me on beingspace.world, where you will find my online coaching offering as well as my UK-based workshops. The Freedom of Spirit workshop for liberation and empowerment, the Pellower Radical Shift in Consciousness workshop for spiritual expansion, and transformational coaching for exploring the mind-body-spirit connection on the expansive path. You can also support the podcast by actually making a donation. I hope you enjoy the show. Welcome to Truth and Transcendence. You can find all our other episodes on truthandtranscendence.com. Today, I'm delighted to welcome special guest Michael Stone. And we're going to talk about Michael's book today, which we'll come on to, but we're also going to talk about something called sacred reciprocity, which I'm going to be asking Michael to explain what that is, because it links really closely with some of what we're going to be talking about. So Michael Stone is a spiritual author, teacher, mentor, shamanic practitioner, radio host, producer, and trauma integration facilitator. He has taught and led live events, classes, teleseminars, and workshops on organizational development, embodied shamanism, moving meditation, mysticism, personal growth, and spiritual fulfillment for over 50 years. He's the author of Living a Shamanic Way of Life and the newly released Traumatized, A Love Story, Healing the Wounds That Separate, Alienate, and Marginalize Us. That, if you're watching, you can see that on the shelf behind me. And Michael and I actually first met back in 2010, something like that, 2009, on the Five Rhythms teacher training, which Michael was already an experienced Five Rhythms teacher at the time. He was refreshing himself and I think assisting the faculty, but I was doing it for the first time. So that's where we first spent a lot of time together on the dance floor and in various restaurants in Manhattan and points west from there. So you can find Michael on welloflight.com. That's WELLOFLIGHT.com. So Michael, without further ado, thank you so much for coming on the show.
No, it's such a pleasure, Catherine. It's wonderful to be here with you. And it's nice to reconnect after all those years too.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And it's
you asked about
sorry.
Go ahead.
You were about to say something.
Well, you asked about sacred reciprocity. And I think it's really an important term. You know, I spent many years studying shamanism kind of as an avocation in the background in the mystical traditions. And there's a word in the Quechua language from the Amazon, people I studied with in the Amazon, called Aini, and it means sacred reciprocity. And I think that that's a really important thing, particularly right now with this advent of separation, which we'll talk about trauma and separation. But much of what happens in that separation is the will to get, you know, and that keeps us separate and apart. And so in sacred reciprocity, it's really finding that balance between the will to give and the will to get. And so that we're all in balance with each other, that there's, you know, it's not, I did this for you and you have to do that for me. It's not that kind of balance. It's kind of balance of maybe I get something from you and I pass it on to someone else. But it's that balance of life, of the give and take, instead of the I need this, I want this. And that's a trauma symptom, really, because the first sense of two key things about trauma, which is kind of my field these days, is first, a symptom is a sense of separation, a separate self. And that actually feeds the second one, which is a sense of scarcity, not just money, but not enough time, not enough people who think like me. All of these are symptoms of trauma. And we can get into talking more about trauma, but that's where it came from. So the two really came together And of course, I was the host of the Trauma Wisdom Summit for the Shift Network for 8 years and did a lot of work with wonderful shamanic teachers and practitioners around the world. So that's where that comes from.
Thank you. Amazing. That's interesting. And of course, you say this in the book about trauma having certain effects on us, and that there are certain very common effects from trauma. And that one about separation. So when you say it creates separation or the separate self, you're not talking about getting in touch with the fact that you are an individual human being, are you? You're talking about feeling cut off from the whole, I think.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot more to it. Let's first let's talk about what trauma is, because that makes it clearer. So first of all, trauma is the most misdiagnosed, misunderstood sense of suffering, source of suffering. Sorry, I have a bite. I have a tongue sore, so I'm a little tongue twisted this morning. So excuse me. So it is an enormous source of suffering, and when you really look at what trauma is, it's an amazing intelligence that's been evolving for hundreds of thousands of years, that in an overwhelming situation, it allows us to shut down fragments a part of our essence, our soul, and it gets lodged in the body as tension or as numbness. And so this is an intelligence. This is not something to get rid of, or something, a pathology or something wrong. This is something that's protecting us in an overwhelming situation. Unfortunately, of course, when that fragmentation happens, if there's not a structure to heal that trauma, like many indigenous communities throughout time, someone has a trauma, whether it's mental, physical, emotional trauma, the whole tribe gets together and sits with them until they realize I'm okay, I'm loved, I make a difference, I'm a person. So that's one part of it. But just to add to that, we were talking about the distance. You're in London, I'm in California, and yet we see each other on the screen. But it also reinforces the sense of a separate self. But actually, in a much more real way, you, Catherine, are showing up over here in my nervous system, and I'm showing up in your nervous system. And in terms of being able to know you, it's completely dependent on my capacity to know myself. So to be able to feel my own feelings and sensations and thoughts with awareness and presence, and to know you, I have to go to my own nervous system. And I go, oh, it's safe to be with her. She's looking in my eyes. She's here with me. I can relax. And so that's one of the things with working with trauma, which I'm sure we'll get more into, but that so important in this particular time right now that we're in, to soften and to slow down and to listen to our inner world. I did a whole chapter on the impact of AI and social media in my book, and how it's escalating these traumas that we carry. So that's a little bit about this sense of separate self. There is no such thing as a separate self. We're all in relationship to each other. And the problem is trauma creates a false sense of separation. I'm separate from myself, my own body. You know that from the work we do with the 5 rhythms. It's, oh my God, I have a body, and there's sensations and movement, and it changes things. So, but we're also separate from each other, and we're separate from nature. And so we've kind of got this like all these lenses that we see the world through are all looking as if I'm an object in a world of objects. And really, the trauma work that I do is about subject-object transcendence, to transcend that false sense of separation and connect more deeply with you.
Yeah. Amazing. A couple of things there really sort of reminded me of a couple of memories of my own. I had a situation where I was married, and then after a long period of difficulty, we then broke up. And after the final conversation, I had to travel home. And I remember distinctly walking into the house and experiencing that the walls of the house were laughing at me, and not in a nice way, right? So that thing you said about the separation or being an object in a world of objects, it was like I was this object rattling around in this place that didn't feel like home. And it felt like the house was laughing at my
Yeah.
grief,
Yeah.
sadness, etc. And that was, in your terms, would that be a trauma response? Would that be a kind of response that was the result of the degree of the distress that I was experiencing?
Yes, it would be a kind of trauma response. It's, it's also part of the awakening process to suddenly feel that, shamanism and the mystical traditions are animistic. That means that how we view life is that everything is alive, everything is connected. And it is that way in the universe. Everything is connected to everything else. It's that way in physics. It's only the human mind that has had a coup over the heart that allows us to have this sense of separation, because there's been, our heart is the ruler of our life, and the real brain that should be operating, but the intellect and the cognition has taken over and suppressed that natural knowing, the inner GPS, which you could call the soul. So when I'm working with people around trauma, it's really connecting with our soul and expanding the capacity of our heart and soul to live a prosperous and authentic and transparent life with each other. So trauma keeps us stuck and in what's called repetition compulsion. And repetition compulsion is the nervous system and the body trying to say, hey, there's this thing that you're not paying attention to. So I'm just going to keep showing you, this fight you're having with your partner, that's about you and that's about your ancestors. And there's a whole nother area, because when I look at trauma, I look at it from a systemic lens. So we call it AIC fluidity, ancestral, individual, and collective fluidity. Those are all impacting us all the time. Much of the trauma that we carry are legacy burdens, things that are intergenerational, that have been passed down from family to family to family for sometimes thousands of years. Many of the wars we have now are thousands of years old. They're doing the same thing over and over again. And hopefully we won't blow ourselves off the planet before we wake up to the fact that we're a traumatized world, and everyone is traumatized. If it isn't individual, it's familial. If it's not familial, it's ancestral, collective, geographic, immigration. It goes on and on and on.
Yeah.
And so to even think that you're not traumatized, when you begin to recognize, no, we're all traumatized. And that is the work. Like Jung said, where the trauma is, that's where the work is. Where the shadow is, that's where the work is.
Yeah.
Those parts that we don't want to acknowledge that we have. And certainly we don't want anybody else to know that I'm carrying this shame or sense of self-doubt or not enough or unlovable, whatever it is that happens. Yeah.
Which, of course, is another expression of being separate, isn't it? If you're self-conscious about your own sense of separation and then won't communicate about it, that's just going to reinforce it, isn't it? So I loved in your book the way you spoke about the generational aspect of it, and of course, you're of a slightly earlier generation than I am, in the sense that your parents were right there in the Second World War and suffered, particularly your mother really suffered. And that was incredibly poignant in your whole description of the effect of that on her and on you. And that really brought home to me how these incredibly violent interludes that we've experienced as humans have these generational knock-on effects to other people going down and down through, through the generations. And my sense was in the book that you've been doing a lot of work on trauma, not just for your own healing and not just for your immediate clients you're working with, but for your own ancestors, your own generational. And you actually say that in the book, don't you?
Yes, absolutely. It's really important to recognize this and to understand that there's a soap opera on Netflix called Another Self. It actually shows you how trauma gets passed down. But let's say that somebody is in World War I and they go into a building that they're supposed to be an enemy and they shoot and they kill everybody in there and they found out it's a family. And they're filled with remorse and shame. They carry that home. They can't talk about it, but that shame is in the family system now. So now the children and the future children keeps getting passed on, this sense of shame that wasn't even anything I did. It came from my great great grandfather, probably. And so and our ancestors are dead, they don't have a body. So you can't do the healing if you don't have a body. So we're the ones that have to break away and do the healing and say, this stops with us. And there's, techniques that we work with in healing. But when you heal that part of yourself that you've been carrying, that contract with the past, with your great grandfather, whoever it is, that legacy burden that you're carrying, when you heal that and say, okay, I'm carrying this, great grandfather, this is yours, and I respect you for the life you've given me. I honor you for that, and I'm no longer willing to carry this. This is yours, and it's not mine. And when we do that through ritual and other ways, then it just all the way back through the generations, it heals. It's no longer something that's going to get passed on to the next generation. So this is really important. Is generational trauma is super important to pay attention to.
Yeah. So you're stopping the buck at that point.
That's exactly. The buck stops here. And I'm honoring at the same time, I'm bowing down to my ancestors, and I'm honoring them in a sense and saying, that was yours. I'm no longer going to carry that. I'm breaking this contract that I have.
Yeah. Something really strikes me in the way that you speak about trauma is there's nothing shameful about it in the way that you talk about it, which is really interesting. Because I think a lot of people, if they're in a conversation, if someone says, "Have you had any traumas?" No, how dare you ask me that question? It's almost like it's offensive or shameful to think one has had trauma. Could you say something a bit more about that particular dynamic?
Well, again, that goes back to the lens of something's wrong, something's broken, I can't do that sense of separation. But yeah, I'm a trauma poster child. Both my parents were in were not only World War II, but at the bombing of Pearl Harbor. They were right in the middle of it. My father was a fighter pilot. I've had many large traumas. 2.5, I found my mother hanging. That was a huge thing that shaped my life. Then later I found my dog hanging as kind of a reoccurrence of that. And then my father was totally absent with his war wounds. So I moved around a lot. I didn't have any grounding. I was really a brat, actually, trying to get attention. And then just as things kind of settled down and I was starting to come out of some of that, my wife was murdered and I was a suspect. And even though the police knew who it was, the person got off in the trial. And I spent 42 years under suspicion and a lot of gossip and slander and finger pointing. So I really was in the crucible of that. You don't have to go to that extreme to heal your trauma, really. But I am so grateful because what's been healed in me, I have no, I totally bow down to my parents and my ancestors, and I don't condone much of the behavior. That doesn't mean I say, oh, that was fine, but because in myself, I can see how that led up to me. And I in the early 70s, I had this realization in a course I was taking. You mean I'm responsible for my own bloody life, that was a huge awakening in San Francisco. I remember just walking down the streets and the lights all got brighter and everything. And I went, wait, life is not happening to me. Life is moving through me. And I need to allow it to move through me by healing this wounding. Trauma's not something to get rid of. You already got rid of it. You suppressed it when you had an overwhelming experience. You pushed it down. You're just getting rid of a part you've already abandoned. So it's not about getting rid of it. It's about allowing ourselves to feel what was too much to feel in that earlier time, to experience the emotional, the physical, and the mental turmoil and struggle and suffering of the time. You don't have to get back into the story. So trauma is really interesting. So there's the event. There's an event. Trauma, when we talk about trauma, we're not talking about the event. I was molested, I was beat up, whatever that was. We're not talking about that. We're talking about what happened inside me when that trauma occurred. What decisions did I make? What patterns did and then the third part is my trauma adaptation. So my parents are fighting all the time and yelling at each other, and I'm a little, 2 or 3 year old, and I say, something's wrong. I want to help here. So, but, I can't help. And I say something's wrong, but I never say something's wrong with my caregivers. When I say something's wrong, there's mommy, me. There's no separation. There's something wrong with me. And then I have to adapt and say, okay, I'll be the helper. I'll be the good person. I'll be the smart one. I'll be the pretty one. I'll be, the one that is successful or goes to college. Whatever that is, it's an adaptation to that early thing. And sometimes it becomes our career. We become a doctor or a therapist out of it. But if you have to do that, if you can't do anything but be the helper, but be the doctor, then you're stuck in a very vicious cycle of self-abuse.
Yeah. Yes. I mean, what you're saying is so potent that, I'm kind of tempted to just sit here and take it in. And this occasionally happens in an episode where you sort of think, oh my God, I just want to drink that in and metabolize it. But it's the thing you say about that there's the event and then there's what goes on inside me, you, the person after the event, and then the adaptation that happens afterwards. I completely see that. And it reminds you of something you said earlier in the conversation where you spoke about after there's been an event, what environment are you in? Is there a support structure? Do you see situations where there's been an event that is a very, what you might call a traumatic event, but then where the process is kind of interrupted by the right kind of support structure so that the adaptation doesn't happen? Does that happen?
Yeah, that's a great question, Catherine. So first of all, a lot of this goes back to early childhood development. And so there are different attachment styles. I won't go into the different styles, but in order to learn how to self-regulate in triggering situations, so the trauma is a triggering situation that reoccurs until we integrate it. So if I wasn't felt, seen, heard, held, protected, and looked at with loving eyes, then that's a co-patterning, an ability that I learned by being seen. Now I can self-regulate, but I can only self-regulate if I got co-regulation in the first place. So now, if I didn't get that, then I'm going to have to learn that. And we were wounded in relationship. This is really important. We are wounded in relationships. The place to heal is not separate. It's in relationship. Therapist is okay, but most therapy, talk therapy particularly, will not touch trauma. I do trauma circles for a reason. 12 to 18 people come together with me, either online or I love the live sessions. And then I can say, yeah, this happened to me and I was really scared and I felt like I was a loser. And then 5 people will say, I thought I was the only one that felt that way. And suddenly it's like, oh, it's okay to be that, you know? I'll give you an example of so as we develop, there's 2 things. There's curiosity, so a toddler goes out and, oh, look, there's the dog, and then the dog barks, ah, and runs back to safety, right? To safety. So curiosity, safety, that's how we evolve. That's how we grow. If you didn't have a safe space to come back to, you don't grow, you don't evolve, you don't develop. Think about a little child. I use this example a lot, but say the 2-year-old crawls away and the dog barks and comes running back and says, Daddy, 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 I'm scared the dog's going to eat me. And Daddy says, oh, don't be silly. Everybody loves that dog. There's nothing to be afraid of, and walks off. Now, that happens all the time, right? That's a trauma event. Why is that a trauma event? Because an emotional request was met with a cognitive response. And the child says, but I am afraid, but I'm not supposed to be afraid. Again, something's wrong. Something's wrong with me. I have to adapt. Whereas if the child goes, and this is not either male or female, but goes crawling away and the dog barks, running back, Mommy, Mommy, I'm scared. I'm scared. The dog's going to eat me. And Mommy says, come here, sweetheart. Come here. Sit up here. You know what? I get scared sometimes too. And it's okay to be scared. Oh, and he hops off, or she hops off and goes and plays with the dog, right? But the difference between those are night and day. One is reinforcing my sense of individuation, not individualism, which is killing the world. Individuation. I now know myself as someone who can feel scared, can feel whatever's arising. So that's a healthy human being. I can feel my feelings. I'm not numb to them. From the dance, how numb we all are to our feelings. Some people can't even tell you. They just think their feelings or our sensations in our body. We have to get back to the body and to the emotions to integrate and do it in a safe, loving space. And that's what we do.
Beautiful. That's a fantastic example, the child and the dog. I can absolutely identify with that experience of, because it's not reasonable to expect us to go through life and have nothing upsetting ever happen.
Right. That's why they take your brain out and they suspend you in fluid, and then you can live a comfortable life. Life isn't comfortable.
That's right.
This is uncomfortable by nature.
We were given that exact same thought form on the exegesis seminar, which was almost exactly the same as Est, which you did yours in the 70s and I did mine in the 70s. There's another thing we have in common, Michael, that we sat in a room doing this thing where first thing you find out is that you're responsible for all your nonsense and all the awful stuff that's happened.
A huge awakening. I know a lot of, I worked in the corporate world for years. I know a lot of major CEOs that are traumatized 5-year-olds running companies.
Yeah.
Running countries. No comment there.
Yeah, in big suits.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, you're right. And it strikes me as well that you've done all this work for decades now, and you've written this book. My God, what writing that book must have been like. And you mentioned before we started that you are doing or have done the audio for that. And so you've lived through all of that. You called yourself a trauma poster child. You've lived through, the perfect storm of, all these different traumatic experiences that you've had. And you've continued to participate with life. In the book, I thought, how on earth did he manage to then have this relationship and then go and do this job, then go and learn to do this? How on earth did he have it in him to do that after all these traumas? But you did very courageously.
Catherine, but not at a cost. I had at 9 years old, I was smoking cigarettes. I was drinking. I was, sent away to military schools. through my early life. I stole things, and I was pretty miserable. I think after my first year of college, I decided to travel around the world, and I had the opportunity to be in a lot of different cultures. Just hitchhiked around. I was a Dharma bum, at Jack Kerouac age, and I met people who were really good to me, and I was touched by it. You know, People that, I remember being hitchhiking. I had been living on Formentera for a while, and then I was hitchhiking to Paris, and I was in Spain somewhere on Christmas Eve hitchhiking, no money, but trying to get to Paris to get some work, and the policeman came, and I go, oh my God, I'm going to spend Christmas Eve in jail, and so he came over to me, and in my broken Spanish, he's come with me, and he takes me to a bar. And it's Christmas Eve, and he says, take care of this person. I'll be back for him. I think, well, he's going to leave me here and then take me to jail, right? That was my thinking. And then he comes back and he takes me home to his house for dinner. This is a poor policeman in a rural Spain, right? And end up this wonderful evening, loving family. And then we go out and dance till 3 a.m. And then, but what really was the clincher after the next day, and they had all this food for Christmas Eve. The mama gives me this basket, which I didn't open till later that night because the police set up a roadblock asking people how far they were going and got me a ride going into the town. He was stopping cars, and I opened the thing, and underneath the food that they sent, again, this is a really poor family, was 100 peseta note, underneath it. That was a fair amount of money at that time, to have that. And I said, I am never going to refuse anyone a place to stay. And for years, my house was travelers came through, and I learned so much about giving, because I was in that place of needing to get, because I didn't get the love I needed. I was trying to get. I was looking through all different ways, money, business, sex, whatever, and then to see this generosity that is at the heart of being human. That's what, slowly got me to come out of it. And the more I engaged in working in support of community and transformational programs and studying the mystical sciences, then that really helped too.
Well, I would really like to acknowledge the spirit within you that guided and supported you to actually keep participating, because you could have just become a street bum, with everything you've gone through, and you didn't, and you became very talented.
This was my responsibility to my mother. When I finally healed the wounding with my mother, I realized what I need to do is pay back what the life I've been given. And that's, I have a wonderful relationship with my dead parents now.
Yeah. Hence your connection to sacred reciprocity.
Absolutely.
And that beautiful, when you were describing that, it reminded me of the whole breathing in and breathing out thing, which is a natural thing unless we actually interrupt it. But it continues to happen. So what was it like for you creating this amazing book that you've written?
Well, it's quite a story, actually, because here in California, the little town I lived in, an angry ex-partner who was an alcoholic and not very reputable, and became more so, was telling these stories that I had killed my wife, I was a womanizer, and I molested my daughter. Just stories made up. And that was not someone who anybody had any credibility, but she told this to a very powerful person, the mayor of our town, actually, who I had dated. And suddenly she started dating me, and then she started just broadcasting and blasting this out in meetings in towns. And it was really brutal. And I tried everything. I did shamanic work. I did all kinds of work. I didn't see any, I don't particularly like lawyers, so I didn't want to sue, but I felt that would even make it worse. So I actually moved to Canada, and I was in Canada for 7 years and I'm a Canadian and American citizen. So had a beautiful time there, a great relationship. And then I got a call in Nelson, when I was in Nelson, from Officer Wilson saying, "We're reopening the case on your wife's murder." I said, after 40 years, And so I came back to the States, and my daughter and I went through quite a grueling, the whole trial over and over again. Over again. And seeing the picture, my wife was really brutally strangled and raped. So I had to go through it all again. And as I was doing that, I started writing the book. So it was like, about 3 years of writing the book. And that was really hard, but it was also cathartic because I was putting it down. I was sitting with it. I was meditating on it. I was feeling into it. You read my book. It's raw and unfiltered. I just say it like it is. And that was my intention was, if I go through this and other people go through this and I'm able to come out the other side, if I tell my story, maybe it will help someone. And what people say about reading my book, the most often said thing is, "I thought I was reading a book about your trauma. And when I got done, I realized I was reading a book about my trauma." And that people say that so many times, it's become kind of a key phrase. But it's true. I think, when people see that if he can go through that, and I'm a white privileged male, I say this in the book, so I'm not in Gaza. I'm not in places in Haiti or other places where life is really hard. I have to say that in spite of the trauma I've had, I've been privileged. And so with privilege comes responsibility, I feel. And that was, I felt I needed to write that book. And then as you said, I just did the audio, which will be out soon, and the ebook. Um, so, and the other part of that was doing the audio was even harder writing the book, because speaking it out, there was something, that happened in my body as I was speaking was very, very difficult for me to do the recording. But I wouldn't have anybody else do it because it's my story, right?
Yeah. Oh, and also, would you want to put them through that as well? I mean, if you said to me, "Catherine, would you please do the audio of my book? Here's 50 grand, I'd be like, well, I'm tempted. But, it would be one hell of an experience reading that book out and having it recorded, even if it's not your story. It's a big, big thing. The thing about someone saying, "I started and I thought it was your story, and then I realized it's my story." I had an interesting experience in that regard. One of the things about it was I noticed such a big cultural difference, which I think is to do with you being American Canadian and me being British. And actually, I'm Scots, which is even more so of what I'm about to say, because the whole kind of Scots mentality is, yeah, you cut your leg off. What's your problem? These things happen. You've got another leg. Make it work, right? Which on one hand is great because it means actually quite resilient, creative, and competent. But on the other hand, it does mean less available to vulnerability.
Yeah.
And some of the way you were describing all of it, it was just, I was thinking, that's so different from how I would write about these experiences. And it actually gives me a lot to read about it written in a very different way from how I would have in my own thing, because it gave me a different insight into a kind of greater connection with the different layers of vulnerability that are possible for us if we're open to them. So that was a really interesting experience.
Yeah.
Very interesting experience. There was one other thing that when I was reading the book, I thought, hold on a minute. How did this guy who had all of this, shall we say, anti-nourishment, at a very early age, the opposite of nourishment, sort of dark light type stuff. How does he become so talented? And I know in the book you do talk about learning to become capable as a strategy to try to be good enough. So you talk about that. But I felt like there was a lot more to it than that. You haven't just become like a really successful corporate lawyer, let's say, earning an enormous amount of money and lots of, fame and kudos, working for Hollywood film stars or something like that. You went in the direction of working with human beings and helping them survive, recover from trauma and things like that. So that's very interesting. Observing that was really interesting, that even though there was the trauma, there was still this big part of you that is like, no, I actually want to give. I actually want to grow. I actually want to learn.
Yeah.
I found that incredibly encouraging.
Let me say something about that because I think it's really important. It's my relationship with my mother, the woman who tried to kill me by putting a pillow over my face, by coming after me with a knife for the first 2.5 years, and then I found her hanging. Getting through that and recognizing who this woman was, who was the assistant to the Pacific Fleet, and when Pearl Harbor was attacked, was one of the first women to graduate from Stanford, was, very successful, but also very sensitive and tender, and went over the edge after the war. My letting go of any kind of blame or holding anything like this is because my mother wasn't there for me, just completely letting go of that. And a lot of that came from doing my shamanic work around legacy burdens. So when you do work to look at your lineage, I often instruct people to find a guide to help you. And so we do a journey, and the guide, goes. So I did a journey, and I was doing it for myself to find a guide, and I decided to go to the upper world, and I had my power animal with me, and I went to the upper world, and it's all luminous and light, and I'm repeating my intention to find a guide to help me, find out more about my ancestry. And all of a sudden, who should appear with her arms outstretched was my mother. Just like, wow. Everything, I bowed down and honored her for the life I've been given. And I took on finishing the job that she was trying to do. Obviously, she was a psychology student at Stanford before there was hardly even psychology. But she had that part of her. And in allowing myself to feel that and to be loved by her from the other side, cleared up anything. And this is real. This isn't some fantasy I made up, and I didn't positive think my way into that. I didn't say affirmations or anything, but I let my body speak. And everything that ever happened, ever in the history of humanity, is in our bodies. There's no separation from their ancestors. And in the West, we've really created this false sense of separation. This, sense of a separate self, the individual. That's why I made the comment between individuation is finding my soul and connecting with my soul's essence. Individualism is separating myself from the world and making myself bigger or better or, more powerful or whatever. And we need a lot more individuation where our talents, our art, our creativity. So integrated trauma is presence. There is no mess there. Integrated trauma means that happened to me, I felt it, and I've integrated it, and it doesn't run me anymore. I'm not triggered. I don't react because of it. Unintegrated trauma is destiny. You're going to repeat it again and again and again until you stop soften, slow down, and let the experience wash over you and feel it. And that is how you integrate it. You don't get rid of it. You integrate it. You make peace with it. And then that makes you more whole, and it gives you more space. And the two things I work as a meditator all the time is working with people to create more space. So there's two things to learn in this. Space is presence. Space is stillness. Space is where creativity, innovation, insight comes from the amount of space. How big is my cup? How much capacity do I have? So there's space, and then within space, there's movement. Movement is energy. Movement is integrate data. It's what allows us to move through the world. So the more space we have and the more awareness about the movement, the more capacity I have to hold life, to hold the world. And I think that's, takes a lot of work and practice. I mean, I'm a serious meditator. I couldn't get by I was up before you an hour of meditation every day. I wouldn't, I couldn't do the work I do with people if I didn't do that. So it's really important to soften and slow. If I had any one thing I wanted to tell people, soften, slow down, and just be, and just stop trying to get somewhere that you don't even know where you're trying to get to.
Beautiful. Well, I was actually going to come to asking you a question, which you've just answered, which is fantastic. Michael, honestly, I feel like I'm going to have you back on if you're willing, because there's so much richness here to talk about. And I would just like to give you a piece of positive feedback, if I had permission to do that.
Oh, yes, of course.
Which is the kind of depth and groundedness of empathy that you're embodying without being sloppy in any way is just so appealing and lovely. And I'm just going to say, excuse me, because I've got a cat that's walking in front of the
Yeah, lovely.
Oops. There you go, Valentine.
Valentine, that's a great name.
He has a heart on his back in his colouring. Yeah, so the empathy is just so lovely to witness and to be with. And the kind of gentle and firm clarity that you have around trauma and working with trauma is just so lovely and so encouraging. And I just want to thank you for that and really appreciate all this work you've done over all these decades. It's just really inspiring. So
it's my privilege and honor to do that. Yeah.
Fantastic. So let me just move on to a couple of questions to sort of wind up the conversation.
Yes.
So we've talked about an awful lot today, and it's been absolutely beautiful. Has there been for you a favorite part of our conversation today?
Well, my favorite part is how you hold space and how inviting and open you are to whatever I have to say. It's not filtered. And the fact that you read my book, so many people interview me and haven't read the book. Yeah, I'm just really grateful to be here with you. And I think we need more gratitude in the world. So to say a final thing, these traumas are not things to get rid of. They're things to be grateful for, because that's how we evolve our soul. That's how the soul evolves, is by meeting them, not suppressing and getting rid of them. So it tenderizes our soul.
It does. Thank you so much. Well, it's been beautiful, beautiful being with you here today. Would you like to leave the listeners with some sort of... Oh, actually, before we do that, let's remind people again of the name of the book.
Yeah.
You just remind the listeners of the name of the book.
Yeah, it's Traumatized, A Love Story, Healing the Wounds That Separate, Alienate, and Marginalize Us. It's available on Amazon. Please tell your bookstores to carry them wherever you are in the world. And let's have a movement of trauma integration, trauma awareness, and healing the wounds that separate us.
Yeah. Yeah.
And my website is Well of Light, WELLOFLIGHT.com. Michael at welloflight.com.
Fantastic. Yeah, do read the book, everybody. It took me a couple of days to read the book. I had to keep reading it, actually, because I had to find out what happened next. It was one of those books, I thought I can't leave in the middle of this experience. I have to keep going, and the whole thing pulls together. And it's not a sob story about trauma, and it's not a psychology textbook about trauma. It's a human story, and there's a bit of theory in there, and there are some exercises and structures in there. It's very well grounded and very, very heartful. And I think anyone could read it and get an awful lot from it.
So I had to laugh. Our mutual friend Eliezer, he was, helping me edit the book, and he every day he'd say, "I had to tell Sherry, oh my God, look at what's happening now." And he kept saying that every time he read a chapter. He's a wonderful writer too.
Yeah. Well, of course, he's been on the show, and we've talked about his book as well. So everybody, if you want to find a good, set of books to read, just read Michael's book, read Eliezer's book, read some of the other books of my other guests. They're all fantastic. I don't know why I seem to draw in these amazing authors and amazing human beings. So I feel very blessed and grateful for that.
I know why. It's your big heart.
Thank you. Well, before we turn into a completely embarrassing love fest, or maybe it's too late already, Michael Stone, thank you so much for coming on the show. It's been an absolute joy.
For me too. Thank you.
Thank you. And everybody watching and listening, thank you so much. And thank you for spreading the word about the show, because like Michael's book, the show is here to be helpful and a gift, and it comes from a place of love. Have a great week. I'll see you next time. I hope you enjoyed this week's episode. It really helps if you give a thumbs up, a 5-star rating, a review, and share with your friends. If you're looking for transformational coaching or an intensive transformational weekend workshop experience, I can help with that. You can actually help the show by making a donation. Until next time, take care.